Welcome to the Bear Archery podcast. I have a special guest coming all the way from Australia, Mr. Ben Selleras. I met Ben a few years back, and we just kind of hit it off. He's an awesome dude. He's a very accomplished hunter. He has punched tags in 16 different countries. He has received awards for some of the biggest sheep ever killed. He's a phenomenally nice guy. And I just love hearing about hunting in Australia. It's been a dream of mine to hunt in Australia, although it's not top on a lot of people's bucket list destination hunts. It is for me. And part of that is probably due to the passion that you hear Ben Selleras talk about hunting in Australia with. So we talk about some of his favorite things to hunt, some of the most difficult things to hunt. We also talk about the cultural acceptance of hunting in Australia and kind of the crossover between the United States and Australia and the struggles that both places have when it comes to hunting. Guys, it's a really good conversation. Ben's a really awesome guy. So I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. As always, this episode is brought to you by our good friends from ScentLok. Guys, wherever you're hunting or whatever you're hunting, ScentLok has you covered. So whether you're in Australia chasing down some of these incredible deer that we're going to talk about, or whether you're in the backcountry, or whether you're sitting in a tree stand in the Midwest, ScentLok has something for you. Guys, I would highly encourage you to check out the entire line of ScentLok and the BE1, the Bowhunter Elite Series, which is the most complete series you will ever find of clothing for bow hunters. So guys, go check out ScentLok and everything they offer. But let's dive in, and I hope you enjoy Mr. Ben Selleras.
With over 90 years of innovation, Bear Archery continues pushing toward the goal of founder Fred Bear, making archery accessible for all. Fred believed the history of the bow and arrow were the history of mankind, and everyone should immerse themselves in the outdoor experience. Welcome to the Bear Archery Podcast, where the mission is simple: to hunt, grow, and inspire others.
Guys, I'm an arrow junkie. I love arrows, and I have found a fondness for deer crossing archery. Everybody makes a good arrow. I'm not saying that anybody out there makes a bad arrow, but what really sets deer crossing archery apart is when I call them, I'm going to get the owner on the phone. I'm going to get the guy that's building my arrows on the phone, and they're going to walk me through a complete custom build. They're not shipping me a box of arrows that they ship out to everybody. I'm going to pick my knot colors, my fletching colors, my wrap colors, the fletching configuration I want on the arrows. Not only that, I'm going to walk him through my setup. I'm going to walk him through what I'm looking to get out of the setup. I'm going to tell him total arrow length I want to be hitting, total arrow weight I want to be hitting, total insert-outsert weight I want to be hitting, FOC, and he's going to custom build a set of arrows and send them to me. My arrows aren't going to be best for you. Your arrows aren't going to be best for me. We need custom arrows. Deer Crossing Archery builds those arrows custom for you, and they always perform. Their silencer shaft is my favorite arrow on planet Earth. I've shot 40 plus animals with that arrow. It always performs. It always blows through the animal. I always get great penetration. It's a micro diameter shaft. They do have a full line of shafts. The new Rupture arrow is a phenomenal arrow. I shot a deer with it this year in Missouri. I love their arrows. Guys, I would highly encourage you to check out Deer Crossing Archery because you don't have to go to a box store and buy a set of arrows that are just made from the factory. You can get arrows custom made for you that are going to work best for you and your setup. Guys, use code Hunting101 to get a discount at Deer Crossing Archery. I would highly encourage you to check them out. They are phenomenal. All right, Ben. So I'm absolutely excited to talk. We did a Pope and Young podcast a few years back. And ever since then, I've kind of wanted to have you on the Bear Archery podcast, and it always got pushed back and always slipped my mind. And then I was sitting at the Wild Sheep Foundation show, Sheep Week, and I was at the awards banquet, and here comes Ben Selleras receiving awards, and I'm like, dang, that's my guy right there. He's making waves. So before we jump in, man, give us an introduction to yourself and kind of what you do there in Australia, and Because I know you guys kind of work with the Australian equivalent to Pope and Young, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah, that's right. I guess it's, well, firstly, thanks for having me, Dylan. It's great to be here with you and having a chat again. And the last couple of years has gone very quickly since our last catch up. We have a organisation in Australia called Trophy Takers, which is, I guess it was based on Pope and Young, formed in the 1970s. I guess it's mostly based on game measurement and recording rather than the active promotion and protection of bow hunting. So it's really more focused on the measuring of game and the recording of trophy game. It's taken that element, I guess, from Pope and Young. So yeah, been involved in Trophy Takers for quite a few years now, and it's not a huge group. It doesn't have a huge membership in Australia, but there's a lot of active bow hunters get involved in it, and I think it's good to. I think there's been I'm not sure if it's the same in the US, but I've noticed there's been a drift away from, I guess, the value that bow hunters collectively put on measuring game as a thing that we do. I think in the last 10 years or probably 20 years, it's become less of a focus for a lot of bow hunters, and there's a lot of bow hunters out there that couldn't care less about measuring their trophies. And that's just an observation of mine, but yeah, I think it still has its place, and I think it's a great way of really celebrating the animals. You know, it's not about celebrating us. It's really about celebrating the animals that we've managed to take out in the bush. So yeah, that's the way I see it. So the Trophy Takers is still ticking along, and it's still we still meet. We have an annual event where we meet each year. And there's it's still fairly active, but it wouldn't be anywhere near the membership that Hope and Young would have in the States, for example.
It's just such a giant misconception that you measure your animals for yourself. Like, so many people, when you talk to them about scoring an animal, they say, yeah, but I don't need any recognition, or, oh, it's not about score, or, oh, it's not about that. Well, I beg to differ, man, because the animal, like, you owe it to that animal. The animal deserves the right to be in a books amongst its peers. And, you know, this is Pope and Young and Bear. We work really closely together, and you know, there's a lot of synergy between the two. And Fred Bear was one of the largest donors to Pope and Young in its infancy, and so there's a lot of history there. But I just think so many people have the misconception that we enter our trophies for the sake of ourselves, like for, you know, some boasting or whatever. It's not about you; it's about the animal.
Yeah, and I think most of us will agree on that. But there's probably going to be variance between all of us as a population of worldwide bow hunters. There's going to be a variance in terms of how much we, I guess, celebrate the animal and how much we celebrate ourselves. I think myself personally, I explain this to people quite regularly. Like, I really struggle with calling bow hunting a sport. I don't use that word, and I haven't really found the perfect word to describe bow hunting as an activity and as a pastime and as a lifestyle, or all these other words that we may call it. But at the end of the day, there is no in something like bow hunting, there is no, in my view, there is no capacity for any competition between individuals. But I think we're so, as modern humans, we're so driven by competition in all the other sports and all the other things that we do. We're 1 in 7 billion, and there's so many drivers for us to be competitive and to compete over our lives. I think we can't help But for some of that to come into the hunting scene, and we do see that. Like I'm sure you see that. But I like to remind people that, technically there is no capacity for there to be any competition between two individuals. We can compare animals. You can go and shoot a whitetail, and I can shoot one the next week that's a bit bigger, and or vice versa, and we can compare those animals, but really it's those animals are. There's no measurable way to compare a hunter to another, in my opinion. There are so many variables when we're hunting. There are so many different factors. And as you know, there's just an endless list of things that come into every hunt, not just like every single hunt. So, I like to remind people that the competition in hunting there's just technically not a place for it, in my opinion. It by definition, it just can't even be a thing. So at the end of the day, it is about the animals. It is about celebrating the animals and respecting them. And that must come from somewhere. And I think about this a lot. Like there must have been a point somewhere in the past, thousands of years ago, where someone somewhere decided, right, I'm going to carry this head home. I'm going to carry this back to the cave or back to the grass hut, rather than just carrying the meat. Someone somewhere said, right, that head looks really cool, or that set of antlers or whatever it was. I'm going to take it back and I'm going to display it at my cave. So that must have happened at some point in history. And since then, it's just developed in if not like most cultures, if not all cultures, it's just become a thing over time, to the point where now we still admire and celebrate trophies. And I'll put that in inverted commas, but when I say trophy, I mean a set of antlers, a set of tusks, a skull, something from the animal to demonstrate its age or its size or its any of those things. So it's a really interesting thing, and there must be a lot of history behind it, and I don't think we fully understand that, but we understand it enough to know that it's important to us, and I think measuring game and recording game is part of that progression into this modern era.
Well, and I think that it's, and the terminology of trophy hunters gets a bad rap, and for good reason. We shouldn't call ourselves quote unquote trophy hunters. But for the people who put down trophy hunters, just to say I'm a trophy hunter does not mean I don't enjoy the meat as well. Just to say that I am more selective on the quality of animal that I kill does not mean that I don't value that meat. Doesn't mean I don't care for that meat. Doesn't mean that I don't prepare that meat, in a purposeful way that is going to feed myself and my family. Because just because I enjoy big antlers does not mean that I could care less about the meat. And, I would dare say, and because trophy hunting gets a bad rap even amongst hunters. And so I would dare say that the guy who is more selective on the animals that he kills, no, I wouldn't dare say that. I don't say this with any kind of apologetics in my voice at all. Because the guy that is more selective about the animal that he kills does more good for the herd than the guy who goes out and shoots whatever he sees. Because what happens is when I shoot a deer that is bigger and older and more mature, it's past its breeding prime. I am taking out a deer that should be removed from the herd. Whereas if you go in and kill a 2.5-year-old deer just because it's the first one you see, you're removing a deer that's in the heat of its prime of breeding and breeding does and furthering that herd. And so
that's right. Yeah.
In the same breath that we as trophy hunters get a bad rap, we're doing more for the good of the herd than the guy who goes out and shoots the first animal he sees. Now, either is fine. Let me just preference that. Either is fine. It's your tag. Do with it how you choose. But you're absolutely right, dude. We have to stop putting people down because of how they hunt, because of what they choose to shoot, whether they choose to wait for a big mature animal or whether they choose to punch their tag on the first thing they see. We have to quit putting people down for what they shoot and why. And so I admire that about you, man. Now, is Is there a lot of separation between hunters in Australia, or are they more one unified front?
There is a lot of separation. That's the short answer. There's a lot of separation. There's a distinct lack of coordination and unity, and that's not just between the bow hunting or within the bow hunting community. That's within the wider hunting community. So, what you see in a place like Australia, which will probably be of interest to your listeners, is there's a lot of cultural differences between a place like Australia and a place like the US. Over here, 95%, if not more, of hunters are dedicated to one method. So they're either a bow hunter or a rifle hunter, or they hunt with hounds. There's very few people who will do or cross over between several methods. Whereas in the States, it's so common to see people who hunt with rifle and bow, and it's probably due to the seasons and the way the regulations work there. We don't have that. We don't have those regulations and those seasons here virtually at all. So there is no drivers for people to diversify between the different styles. So what you've got in Australia is a bow hunting community. You've got a rifle hunting community. You've got the dog hunting community. I guess in Australia there's two distinct styles when it comes to hunting with hounds. There's hunting wild pigs and hunting sambar deer. You'd be interested to know there's a very interesting, I guess.
Wait, what was that second thing you said?
Sambar deer, SAMBAR.
What is that?
So that's a huge Asiatic deer that's almost the size of an elk. It's bigger than a red deer. They're originally from Asia. They're a chocolate brown color, huge animals, and they generally live in very mountainous, thick terrain down in one particular state called Victoria. They virtually are restricted to one state. So there is a whole culture of hunting this one species of deer with hounds in this one particular state, and it's huge. There are thousands and thousands of people who are very dedicated to that style of hunting. So I've never seen really in the modern day, I can't think of too many examples of hunting deer with hounds anywhere in the world. I can't think of any examples. I guess in Europe they do driven hunts where they're flushing the deer out. So there is I guess that style in Europe it's still popular, but yeah. So we're in these distinct groups, and there's a lack of unity within these distinct groups, and there's a lack of unity as a whole as well. We are like that's a whole nother discussion in itself, and I could give you plenty of reasons why I think that is the way it is. But I think just unfortunately we're just not particularly organized, and there's a lot of I guess there's a lot of people who it's hard to find common ground. It's hard to find common ground. There's a lot of people heading in different directions with different ideas, and there's always a lot of egos. I'm sure you've seen that in your travels. There's a lot of different factors that lead to this lack of unity, but it is a big problem. And my fear is that we're going to lose something major before we my feeling is that we're going to lose something, and that's going to be the trigger for people to actually come together and unify and actually work towards some solutions. I fear that's probably going to happen. We've already lost bow hunting in one state. You'd be interested to know that bow hunting is not legal in one of our 7 states in Australia. So we've already lost it in one state, and there's been a lot of talk in recent months about another state potentially banning bow hunting as well. So just think about that. Imagine a state completely banning bow hunting, and that's it's on the cards. It's very it could easily happen any moment, and when it happens in one state, it could quite easily fall into another and then another. So,
and that's exactly
it's a pretty
why
serious situation.
If you don't think that our freedoms to hunt are on the verge of being taken, like if you don't see what is happening, because here's what's not going to happen. They're not going to come in and they're not going to say, all right, bow hunting is no longer illegal in Texas. You can no longer shoot deer in Texas. That's not what they're going to do. but they're going to come after us. Consider it like death by 1,000 cuts. You know, they're not going to automatically just say, okay, no more bow hunting in the United States of America, but they're going to come after, you know, using archery equipment in one single county. And then once they get that county, they'll come after the state. And then once they get that state, they'll move to another state, or even take out deer hunting, because that's, you know, a massive thing that would be taken and would all get attention. But think about taking away coon hunting in one single state, or squirrel hunting, or, you know, the use of single pieces of equipment in states. Like, they're going to start taking things piece by piece. And then all of a sudden you're going to look around and you're going to say, wait, where did it go? Like, what happened? How did this happen? So is hunting, because you've been all over the world to hunt, is hunting as commercialized in Australia as it is in the States?
No way.
Yeah.
Like, it's become such a like, there's just such a lot. I guess the thing is, it's just such a small population of people who actively hunt, especially when you if we're talking bow hunters, that's even a smaller fraction of the overall population of hunters. There's such a small number of us out there that the average Australian person in their lifetime probably doesn't come in contact with anyone who's actually a hunter in their life. So the average person out there right now in Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane, not so much the country, but particularly in the cities where the biggest population is, they're going to go through their whole life without ever even meeting a hunter or having any idea what hunting is about. Their whole perception of hunting is based on what they've seen on social media and on TV, and the story they saw about Cecil the lion, and what they remember from the Bambi movie. Like, whereas in the States, I think there's a much larger percentage of people are probably hunters and have interface with hunters, and therefore have an understanding, or at least have had a chance to gain some understanding of who we are and what we are actually about. So I think that's an issue at the moment. And what that also means for us is, I think in Australia, there's probably a lot of people who are pro hunting. Obviously the hunters, there are a lot of antis who are the ones that are out there trying to bring us down. But that other probably 80% of the population that is somewhere in the middle, I think they're quite undecided, and they're probably they can probably swing both ways. So it's a real like at the moment it's a major PR issue for us, and it's really about educating the uneducated, and that's our challenge at the moment is really getting across to those people who haven't met a hunter, they haven't had any exposure to real modern hunting, and just don't really know what it is. And as we know, any sort of good kind of practical, like average person, once they see what we do and what we're about and how we go about our activities, they're probably going to be supportive of what we do, unless they're very, very strongly against any kind of harm coming towards animals. So I think there's like, you would never walk into a supermarket wearing camouflage in Australia. You would, I live in a country town, like I live in a town of about 5,000 people. If I walked into my supermarket wearing camouflage and like branded hunting clothing, everyone would stare at me and they wouldn't have a clue. They'd probably think I was from the army or something like that. You will never see someone walking down the street wearing camouflage. It's very underground, and it's very hidden, I guess, from society. And it's not in the faces of the general community. And that goes for the cities and country areas as well these days. It's very much behind the scenes what happens.
I would highly encourage you. I would highly encourage you to read. There's a book, and I'll send you one. It's written by Peter Churchborn in the NRA, but it's called How to Talk About Hunting. I don't know if you've ever heard it or read it, but it's a phenomenal book. And basically they can take you worldwide and tell you what a 35-year-old Asian woman who lives in New York City thinks about hunting. And, how do you have those conversations to start showing them the truth behind hunting? Now, are we trying to create every single one of them into hunters? No, because we never will. However, we might very well need those people to vote one day. When an issue about hunting is put in the ballot boxes, we might very well need them to understand what we do and why we do it. When it comes to that ballot box biology and voting based off of pure emotion rather than science, we might very well need them to say, well, you know what? I talked to a hunter one time named Ben Selleras or named Dylan Ray, and man, the way that they articulated about hunting made me realize that, they're not all bloodthirsty, nasty, ravengers that are going out and just killing anything they see. And so it's a phenomenal book. Now, I would highly encourage, I wouldn't encourage everybody to read the book because it's very scientific and analytics and a lot of numbers and, a lot of science research that you're reading through. So it's not like just anybody should just pick up this book and start reading it because you'll hate it. But for anybody who is in that line, for anybody who's in the industry, I'll say that, should definitely 100% read the book. And especially if you have a conservation mind, like if you are involved in any sort of hunting conservation, you 100% should read this book. So, and I don't know if you can get one over there, but I'll certainly have Peter send you one and get that in your hands. Guys, I'm a big believer in prioritizing your feet. Your feet should always be a priority, and you should always be considering what's on your feet. If you're in the mountains and you've got blisters and hot spots, you are not going to go as far. You're not going to make it to that next ridge. You're not going to stay on the mountain as long. Ultimately, you're not going to be as successful. If you're sitting in a whitetail stand and your feet are freezing, you're going to get more jittery. You're not going to be as still. You're not going to be as quiet. You're not going to stay as long. Ultimately, you're not going to be able to kill that big buck in the dead of winter. If you're chasing antelope, you've got to be able to be quick and quiet and fast and have comfortable feet. Guys, no matter what you're chasing, no matter the pursuit, no matter the game, your feet should be a priority. I have fallen in love with Schnee boots. I didn't even know how normal hot spots and blisters were in my life until I got a good pair of boots, because I was probably a lot like you. I would run to a Cabela's Bass Pro and I would buy a pair of $100 boots thinking that I was saving money. But those boots break down faster and I got to keep buying boots. So guys, don't let a pair of $400 boots keep you from buying good boots, because in the long run, those $100 boots, they add up. Whereas if you spend good money on a good pair of Italian-made, handcrafted boot, they're going to last you for 10, 15 years. They're going to be way more comfortable. You're going to be more successful. Your feet will be more comfortable. You will thank me later. So guys, go check out schnees.com for all of your boots. That's SCHNEES.com. The best boots on planet Earth, Schnee boots. Go check them out. Thank me later. But guys, start prioritizing your feet and get yourself a good pair of boots.
That's a great one to, I haven't heard of that book, but that's a great one to just be sharing amongst the community too. Just telling people that book's out there, and just telling people where to get it and stuff like that. Like, that sounds like a great tool for us to be using at the moment. And I'd like to mention something. Like, there's so many, like, obviously this is a huge rabbit hole, this conversation, and there's so much going on at the moment. There's so many really positive things happening out there at the moment. The whole emergence of blood origins recently, Robbie's work over the last several years. There's lots of really great progress happening, and there's a lot of different arguments and a lot of different. I guess there's a lot of different. I guess we're thinking more about why we do this and why we hunt. There's been a lot more of that rhetoric recently. But one thing I'd like to mention, and I'd challenge you to have a think about it, and maybe the listeners as well, is in my work, I'm an environmental engineer by trade. So I work I've mostly worked in major oil and gas construction projects, mostly pipelines and stuff like that, but always on the environmental management side. But often my work crosses over with the cultural heritage side of things as well. So often we're very linked. And cultural heritage is a term that we are not using enough. Now, in this modern era, like right now, the term cultural heritage seems to be reserved for groups of people who have been westernized less recently, to put it simply. And everywhere I've worked, that's basically the case. But every single human being on this planet has the right to cultural heritage, and we all have, whether we know it or not, this link to what you would call intangible cultural heritage. No matter where we're from, no matter what the color of our skin, no matter where our ancestors have come from or whatever. Like my ancestors are Spanish and French and English. I've got a whole range of, you probably do too. But all of our ancestors not very long ago were doing this as part of their basic survival, and it's really something that went for thousands and thousands of years, a timescale we can't get our heads around. And that link to that heritage is still strong in us. That's why bow hunting makes so much sense to us when we walk out in the bush. That feeling that's hard to describe, that feeling we get when we're out hunting with a bow, that is something that's still very deep inside us, and the reason for that is because our ancestors were doing it for so long. So I think the term cultural heritage needs to be used more often. And when you look at legislation and how cultural heritage is, I guess, protected by international legislation, that's when it becomes really interesting. So if you start to really look into the definitions of cultural heritage, and you look into, like, for example, the UNESCO definition and how that, the level of protection that it has, I think that's an avenue that we need to start going down a lot more, because bow hunting is my cultural heritage. And just because we've got people who are so detached and lost from their heritage that are out there trying to stop me doing what I'm doing, just that doesn't mean we should cave in and lose it. Like it's just a term I think we should start using a lot more. So I challenge you to think about that and maybe pop it into a sentence at some stage. Yeah.
And I've said this before, so I don't really want to get stuck on it too deeply, but the whole idea of not hunting, when it comes to the human race, the idea of not hunting is really a young idea. If you told somebody 100 years ago, oh, you shouldn't hunt, they'd be like, well, then how do I eat? Like, what do you mean I shouldn't be a hunter? And it goes back to exactly what you're saying. Like my life, my world is built because people decided to go out and hunt and to get food. If you would have told my great grandpa, hey, we don't hunt, like, okay, well then how am I supposed to get food? Like, and maybe I'm going too young, maybe my great grandfather, but if you told my great grandfather, hey, we're going to run to the store and buy meat, he'd have been like, what are you talking about? Like, yeah. How, because that ideology in terms of the human race is really young, but then the non-hunters make it seem like we're pulling this idea of hunting just out of nowhere. And it's mind blowing to think you would go out and kill something. Well, yeah, that's that it's in our DNA, literally in our DNA, to go out and kill what we eat.
Yeah. And it's going to become a thing again, Dylan. I'm not sure. I'm not a pessimist, and I'm not a prepper or anything like that. But it's going to when you just look at the very most basic cycles of what's happened on this planet so far, there's going to come a time again where we rely on hunting. let's face it, the time is going to come again where people are going to have to know how to light a fire. They're going to have to know how to hunt and gather and survive, because I just think it's ludicrous to think that this society that we live in now is going to continue on this path.
You're absolutely right.
It's just not. It's
and
not
we got
realistic.
a taste of it. And I don't know how COVID was in Australia, but we got a taste of it with COVID, because the people who hated hunters and why on earth would you hunt? And I don't eat wild game. That's disgusting. Well, all of a sudden when the meat ran out at the Walmart, people were calling me saying, hey, can I have some meat? And I'm like, wait a second. I thought you were against hunting. Right, but I can't. There's no meat at Walmart. We need meat. And I'm like, so all of a sudden you're okay with how I live. Like when you can't run to the grocery store and buy it, all of a sudden you're okay with it now. And so we got a taste of it. And I think it was good for the hunting community and good for the non-hunting community to figure out, man, they've got something, they've got something worked out to where they didn't starve throughout all that when we couldn't get meat.
That's right. That's exactly right. And there was a huge boost in bow and arrow sales and broadheads and rifles and ammunition and hunting gear in general in Australia. Like during COVID, it just went absolutely crazy. Like, because it did. There was so many people who were right on the edge of hunting, I guess, who it was the catalyst that was needed for them to go, right, well, we need to look at another option here. And COVID was one thing, but there'll be something else will happen. It may not be in our lifetimes. It may not be in our kids' lifetimes either, but it's going to happen. Something major will happen. And the reliance that we have on financial systems and food systems and the way things currently are, the whole setup is so fragile. It's just so fragile. And there will come a point where we have to go back to basics, and hunting will be a thing that we need to go back to. So that's my view on reality. But we've gone pretty deep there, mate. We've covered some pretty deep topics and gone fairly deep straight into it. But no, I think it's good. I think these conversations are great, and I love having these types of conversations with mates who are hunters and also mates who are not hunters. Like it's great to have these discussions, and it's
let's take a jump back on a lighter note, dude. We gotta revisit this whole sandbar. Is that how you said it?
Samba. Yeah, we pronounce it samba. It's kind of spelled sandbar. If you're an Aussie, you'd say samba deer, as in the style of dance. But there's actually an R at the end, so it's SAMBAR. So
I'm looking at them now. They look crazy stinking cool. I remember one of my favorite things about talking with you the first time was just hearing about hunt. And I remember I kind of started using the phrase hunting down under, and just hearing just the way you talked about it and how different it was to hunt over there. And this is definitely back on that same track, because this looks like a crazy cool stinking animal. I don't know if you've ever seen it, guys, but it's literally an elk, but a deer at the same time. Like, it's a really cool animal. So how do you hunt these? Are you tree stand, spot and stalk? How do they rut? Like, tell me about this animal.
They're probably pound for pound. They probably would be. There's a few different arguments here, but yeah, they're definitely one of the most difficult deer to take in Australia.
Really?
They generally live in very thick forest, very kind of not the sort of forest, very noisy forest, I guess you could call it. It's the Victorian bush is very difficult to stalk through. It's not the kind of forest where you can pick your way through and there could be an opportunity around any corner. It's difficult. It's difficult terrain to hunt. Not many of these deer get shot with a bow each year. There's a lot of effort goes into them with rifles and with hounds as well. The hound crews take thousands and thousands of deer per year. But there's a very, very small number of these deer that get taken with a bow each year. They're really, really, really difficult to stalk. And there will have been a few that have been taken with tree stands, and they're definitely some people would use tree stands sometimes, but it's very rare in Australia for anyone to use tree stands. It's only a novelty sort of thing that you very rarely see.
Now, how big are these? How much do they weigh?
Well, a big stag is not much different to not that much. Well, a little bit smaller than an elk, but bigger than a red stag. So there's not a like if you know roughly how big a red stag is, and obviously you know how big an elk is, it's probably about halfway in between. So they're bigger and heavier than a red deer. They are big, but they're just incredible at disappearing in the forest, and their senses are absolutely phenomenal. Like they're well above in terms of difficulty. In terms of the difficulty due to the animal's natural senses, I would put them at the same level as axis deer, and definitely ahead of fallow deer and red deer. Yeah, they're really, really, really tricky to hunt. And
which is why people use dogs.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So that's why that culture would have formed, was because it was so, in those days, it must have been so difficult to even get one shot at one deer with a rifle that they went, bugger this, I'm going to get some dogs. And that's exactly right. That's how it would have started. But there's plenty of guys in Victoria who are really successful bow hunters, who have hunted around Australia and around the world, who still haven't shot one of these deer, and it's the deer of their home state. So that just brings it into perspective. Like they're mostly based in one particular state in Victoria, which is where the city of Melbourne is. But there are plenty of very active bow hunters in Victoria who have never shot one of these things. They are.
Have you ever shot one?
Like I've shot one. Very interesting story. They live in Victoria. That's their main range. And like where sambar deer come from, India, generally that sort of region, the subcontinent, India, Sri Lanka, and further to the east, sort of towards Myanmar and Thailand. And they live across a fairly, like their original habitat is quite a wide sort of broad range. There was one particular tiny population that still exists up in the Northern Territory, which is where we hunt buffalo and bantang. They were released in the mid-1800s when there was a failed settlement up there, which was supposed to be Darwin. So there was a remote settlement. They persisted for about, I think, 20 years or 15 years, and eventually it failed. But that's how bantang got to Australia, and there's also a small population of sambar deer. Now, those things are like ghosts up there. Like, even to see one is out of, like, you could hunt there for weeks and weeks and weeks and not see one deer. They're just absolute ghosts. But on my first trip up there, on the very first morning, while filming a hunt for a short film and a DVD we made, I shot one on the first morning. Yeah, it was really crazy. And we got it on film too. It was a spiker. So it wasn't like a mature stag or anything, but it was just, yeah, like any deer up there is I think 3 have ever been shot with a bow. So, well, there's actually 4. So there's four that have ever been recorded that have been shot with a bow up there in history. So it's very, very rare, yeah.
Wow. So you are part of the elite, like, and don't even try to say no, like, dude, you're one of the very few, man. Like, quite literally a handful of dudes have done it, and you're one of them. So, man, that's crazy. And they look stinking cool. Like, guys, Google them because they look awesome. It's like a small elk.
They're really cool looking, and yeah, like they're very similar to a rooster deer. So genetically, their closest relative is the rooster. They also have generally 3 points on each antler, so they're a 3x3. Rooster look fairly similar, like in terms of their color, and their antler formation is reasonably similar. There's a few differences, but and they, I guess, border each other in their natural habitat in Asia. So I'm not sure if they actually totally overlap. I don't think they do overlap in Asia, but they're obviously neighbours and genetically very close. And we have Roosa in Australia as well. So we Roosa are one of our favourite and most actively hunted, I guess, deer species in Australia. So it's interesting in Australia. We have six species of deer, and they're all very different from each other. And they all live in completely different places. Occasionally there's overlap where two species of deer live in the same place, which is awesome when you can get it. And all of these deer seem to just fit into their habitat so ridiculously well that you would swear they are native, like none of these animals are native that we hunt here. They're all introduced. So we can't hunt. There's no native animals that we can hunt like you guys. But when you go and hunt these species where they've ended up, like where they actually exist now, you would swear they belong there. And that goes for the sambar deer in the forests of Victoria. It goes for the axis deer, which we call them chittle deer in Australia. We don't really use the word axis. We call them chittle, which is the original Indian word. Like where they live, you would just swear that they've always been there because they just seem to match that habitat so well. And it's the same for the other four as well. They all seem to really fit into that environment where they've been sort of released and where they've ended up. And even though deer are introduced species in Australia, and I guess the government generally, in most cases, sees them as a pest. They're not well regarded as a game resource yet by most government departments. We absolutely treasure them. Like the hunting community just absolutely treasures our deer species, and we feel so privileged and lucky that that over the course of history, these deer ended up in our country, and that we do have these populations that we can hunt. And there's six very special species, and we love them to death. Just like you have a relationship with whitetails, and you probably do with muleys, and you probably, it's not the same. How you feel about hunting mule deer is probably not the same about as the emotions that come with hunting whitetail. And it's the same for us. Like we have this. It's interesting how we have this different kind of unique relationship with each of these species. And we love our deer, man. Like our six deer, we absolutely adore them and love them. And it's quite a challenge to, like, not that many bow hunters have taken all six deer, put it that way. Like it's only still a fairly limited list of Aussie bow hunters who have managed to take all six species. That's a really hard undertaking to get all six of them. It's very, very difficult. Yeah. So
do you guys have, is there one deer that is predominantly more hunted? I mean, if you look at license sales across the United States, whitetail is astronomically higher in tag sales. Is there one deer that is way more hunted than all the other species?
Yeah, I would say these days that it's the fallow deer. They're probably the most widespread in Australia. They live in multiple states. They've just, I guess they're available and accessible, and they've become very popular. The latest craze in Australia is everyone has to go out and shoot a velvet buck before they actually strip their velvet. So right now that's happening. You're seeing guys out there hunting them right now pre-rut. The rut hasn't kicked in yet. It's early April. But yeah, shooting velvet bucks has become a massive craze lately. It doesn't really interest me. I'd rather hunt them during the rut. But I'd say fallow would be number one. And they are an exciting deer. Like during the rut, they're very aggressive. They're very vocal. There's a lot of action, and you can call them. So you can rattle and call them similar to a whitetail, I guess. And they are technically the only deer species that technically are termed a buck and a doe. So that's the correct terms. All the other five species, they're a stag and a hind. That's the correct terminology. So yeah, fallow, they're the true buck of Australia, and that'd be number one. I think number two would probably be red deer. Red stags are fairly widespread. Again, they're very exciting to hunt. They're vocal. You can call them in. It's very interactive. And then I think after that, it would probably be a toss-up between Roosa and Chiddle. And I would say Samba and hog deer would be at the bottom. Hog deer are a very small mini deer that's the access to them is very limited. So there's only it's a very limited range in terms of the habitat that they live in. It's very difficult to get access to private property to hunt them. And there are a couple of opportunities to go into a ballot and have your name drawn, basically essentially to draw a tag. But the chances are extremely low. So hog deer hunting is very, very, very limited in Australia. The opportunities are very limited. So that's a really tough one to tick off the list unless you're really, really lucky. So yeah, that's probably a good summary or a brief summary of the 6 deer. Yeah.
Guys, I don't need to tell you about the blazer vein. You're probably familiar with the blazer vein, and you're probably familiar with boning. Boning has been around forever. It's a name you can trust. They sell products you can trust. They have everything that you need to build your own arrows. All of the jigs to fletch your own arrows, all of the veins, all of the wraps, the countless, numerous types of veins and wraps to build any kind of configuration you want. They also have some really cool Fredbear branded products with their Fredbear camo wraps and their Fredbear flannel wraps. Something that's really cool about that Fredbear flannel, that's actually a photo that was taken of one of Fredbear's flannel famous shirts, you know, the red and gray and black that he always wore. That's actually a photo taken of his personal shirt and put on a wrap. It looks really cool, especially on some traditional arrows. But my very favorite configuration, and this is coming from an arrow junkie that's tried out all different kind of veins and all different kind of configurations, I have found that this configuration stabilizes pretty much every arrow. It's whisper quiet. They fly fantastic. The 3-inch Bronco vein in a 4 fletch absolutely flies like a dart, whether you're shooting mechanicals or big fixed. This is going to be a fletching configuration that will work. Again, whisper quiet, long range accuracy. I love this configuration. This is on every single one of my compound arrows. They just work. Guys, I would highly encourage you to check out boning, not just for the blazer vein, but for the heat vein, for the Broncos, for the X veins. Everything that you need to build your own arrows is right there on Boning's website. They've been around for ages, and I promise you, if you order from them, you're going to get products that you can trust.
Now, do a lot of people come? I mean, is Australia a destination place to come hunting? Do a lot of people from the States come to hunt Australia or no?
I think it would be one of the least popular hunting destinations out of all of the countries that offer any type of hunting tourism in the world.
Why is that?
So I've heard many times, particularly European hunters, basically call our animals farm animals. You know, they see pictures of buffalo and pigs and goats and all the typical species we hunt, and they kind of just think we're hunting semi-domestic animals. You know, they don't really respect them as a wild animal. We obviously do. We know they're wild, and we know exactly how wild they are. But I think there's this perception in some parts of the world that we're not really hunting, that they're not like, they're not the same as a true native wild animal like you'd see in Europe or North America, for example. The main attractant, I think, for international hunters still is the buffalo. That probably brings the most international hunters per year, and the bantang would probably be second. And often they're tied into a combo hunt. I would say New Zealand, which is so close. New Zealand is such a short distance from Australia. I would estimate that there would be 10 times, and I'm just making up numbers here, but I'm just having a guess. I would estimate there'd be 10 times the number of international hunters that go to New Zealand per year compared to Australia per year.
Yeah.
Now,
I would say it's
attraction
probably
in New
close.
Zealand is, and like obviously the red stag has become a complete industry on its own in New Zealand. It's become a huge industry, particularly the estate hunting of those huge pumped up red stags that are obviously not wild animals. They're penned animals in most cases. And I guess New Zealand has some mountain species in the tahr and the chamois. So to have those two capra species that are fairly accessible and fairly affordable. They're both very affordable hunts when you look at mountain game around the world. I guess there's a bit more attracting people to New Zealand, and the industry there is certainly geared up to accepting a lot more international hunters per year. So I see Australia as one of the lowest on, like when you look at international, and I've got many friends who have hunted the world and whatever, and Australia is just not very high on the priority list for the average American hunter or European hunter. It's generally not going to be that high on the priority list. You've probably been to a lot of places and hunted a lot of different animals before you go, oh, you know what, I'm going to go to Australia and hunt a water buffalo. And the adventure here is like the quality of the hunts that are on offer and the quality of the outfitters and the experiences are absolutely phenomenal. Like to go on if you went on a buffalo hunt, for example, which you definitely should, the experience of that would just be absolutely mind blowing for you. You would just be like, it would totally blow your mind to go on a buffalo hunt in Australia. And yeah, like it's the experiences that are on offer are equal to, if not more amazing than what you'll see in lots of other parts of the world. So yeah, there is the opportunities there, but there's not a lot happening. There's not a huge number of international hunters per year. It's still fairly minimal compared to somewhere like New Zealand or Argentina, or just comparing to other countries where you're mostly hunting introduced animals rather than native animals. Yeah, nothing like the numbers that Argentina and New Zealand.
You say it's not up on people's priority list. Ever since our first conversation, I have wanted to hunt Australia. And kudos to you, man. You do a good job. You're passionate about where you live. You're passionate about the hunting. And that goes back to, if you want to learn how to have conversations about hunting, be passionate about it. Like if you want to learn how to communicate why we hunt, where we hunt, when we hunt, the reasons behind it, our cultural heritage, you got to be passionate about it. Like you can't be willy-nilly about it. And since our first conversation, dude, I've wanted to hunt Australia. So is it super expensive to hunt Australia? I mean, can I come and hunt Australia for, how does that look price comparatively to if I want to go and kill a red stag in New Zealand or, an axis buck or whatever? How's the price breakdown to hunt in Australia?
It's pretty affordable, really, compared to comparative to virtually any other place in the world. It is very affordable. The most expensive hunts are the remote wilderness hunts for buffalo and bantang up in the Northern Territory. At the moment, you can score if you got lucky, you could score a buffalo hunt for a little less than $10,000 US. Most of them are going to be around that $10,000 US, and some outfitters charge significantly more. But if you had a budget of around $10,000 US for a buffalo hunt, you could make that happen. The bantang are considerably more expensive, so they sort of start at around 15,000 and go up from there. They're much more the opportunities are much less on bantang, and they're much more prized, and there's less opportunities and less of them. So it's it's more of a specialist kind of hunt, and they are a really amazing species on their own. But look,
they're really good eating too, aren't they?
The young ones are okay, but the big bulls are not good at all. Yeah, the big mature bulls are just really virtually inedible.
Oh, okay. See, I thought I remembered hearing they were like delicious, like phenomenal eating.
They look tasty. Like when I see one walking around, it looks tasty to me. But when you try and eat one, no, it's not. It's just very, very, very tough meat. Yeah, especially like an old bull is very, very hard. Like you could put it through a grinder or a mincer, and you could. There's ways that you could manage it, but no, they're generally, the young ones are okay. And buffalo meats, I really love buffalo meat, but again, like it's about the right cut and the right animal. Like if you just take the wrong cut of a big old bull, it's not going to be a good meal.
What is
So
your
that,
best
like, I guess-
tasting? What's your best eaten wild game in Australia, in your opinion?
I think the axis deer is probably still the number one
Oh,
out of all
bingo.
of our species. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And rooster would be number 2 for me. All of those 6 deer species are quite different in their taste. And as you see with anywhere in the world, like if you compare all the antelopes in Southern Africa, or if you compare the deer of North America, there's going to be those distinct differences. But axis I would rate number 1 and rooster number 2. And the others would sit somewhere under there. But yeah, axis deer is pretty hard to beat. Like it's pretty amazing, venison. But in terms of other opportunities, yeah, like for say if you wanted to book a guided deer hunt, you would do that for a lot less. Like you could come in here and book a really awesome bow hunt for, say, a red deer or a fallow deer or a rooster or samba or axis. Hog deer is a little bit more difficult, but the other 5, you could book a hunt for sort of 4 or 5 or 6,000 US, depending on the location and other factors. And the other thing is there's a if you're willing to sort of connect with people and sort of make the right contacts, there is the potential to organise a swap, which I think works really well. I've done that a few times recently with mates around the world, but a lot of our hunting is on private land, so the vast majority is on private land. So what that comes down to is being lucky to have access to a particular ranch or a particular property. So if you happen to know someone who has great access for a particular species, you could go and hunt with them for free. Like you don't even have to buy a license. You could come here, you could fly over here tomorrow, and you and I could go hunting deer. We could go hunting axis deer 3 hours from here, and you wouldn't even need a hunting license or anything. You wouldn't have to pay a cent.
I'm on
so
my
there is
way.
that kind of opportunity as well.
I'll see you tomorrow. I will. I'll make plans. I will bite the bullet, and I'll be there tomorrow, dude. We'll be hunting deer.
That's how it can work. So if you hook up with the right people, and you create these opportunities, that I think there's a lot to be said for that, rather than just going straight to an outfitter and paying the full retail price for a hunt. I've done that recently with a good friend of mine in France, Errol Benstead, who's the editor of the French bow hunting magazine. He's just hosted me in France recently, and we went hunting 2 species of chamois, and he came over here hunting buffalo with me last year. He shot a huge, mature, amazing buffalo bull on the first morning of the hunt with his longbow at about 10 yards. So like that was just crazy. That whole that swap that we did, like that for him to come to Australia and just experience buffalo hunting in Australia, particularly with a longbow, that's pretty ballsy. And then for me to go over to France and hunt with him was just like, it's just such a cool way of creating opportunities and having those experiences. And when you're with an outfitter and you're paying money, you've got all these expectations and this is how you want things to be. And you sort of go with the flow and whatever, but it's still a financial transaction. Whereas when you do a swap, you're sort of hunting with a mate, you're hunting with a friend. You're not just purely being guided. It's a different experience when you're hunting with someone who you've connected with as a friend rather than a truly sort of financial exchange.
So
I think there's a lot to be said for that. And I think,
no, go ahead.
Sorry, mate. I was just going to say, I think there's a lot to be said for that. And I think that potential for particularly Americans with the opportunities that you guys have in like there seems to be such a broad range of opportunities, and Australian hunters are really interested in American hunting. Like so much of the media, so much of all of our equipment comes from the States. We're very aware of what's going on in the hunting world in the States. You're probably not very aware of what's going on here, but we are very aware of what's going on in your country and within your hunting culture. So I think for like the average American guy that wanted to come and experience a hunt in Australia, it wouldn't be that hard to make the right contact to do something like that, to do a swap, because to me that's a great way of doing it. And some people won't want to do that. Some people would just rather book a hunt, and that's fine. And I organise hunts, like I have a booking agency, so I'm up for that anytime. If anyone wants to book a buffalo hunt or book any kind of hunt in Australia or any part of the world, like that's I do that every day. So there's different ways to approach it. There are different opportunities, and there's something for everyone, I think. Yeah.
So how many countries have you hunted in?
It's 16 now, I think.
Wow.
It's either 16 or 17. Yeah, I thought I had it right a few weeks. I counted it up a few weeks ago, and I thought I had it right, and then I realized I had it wrong. But it's either 16 or 17. Yeah, I hunted in Mexico last year, late last year, and that was either number 16 or 17. Yeah.
Wow. Yep. So where all have you hunted in the States?
It's pretty crazy. I've only hunted. This will make you laugh. I've only hunted in Texas, in the States. I've hunted in Canada. I've hunted in a few different parts of Canada, but in the States, I've only hunted in Texas. I did a whitetail hunt, sort of a fair way out from San Antonio, and I also hunted blackbuck in a couple of spots in the Texas Hill Country, free range, but didn't have any success. And then I ended up getting an opportunity to hunt one with some random guys that one of my mates from Texas who I met on a hunt in Canada many years ago. One of his friends had a ranch with free range blackbuck. We managed to organize it, and I managed to get a hunt in, and I got one. And I was really, really obsessed with blackbuck at that time, so it was a big deal for me to get an opportunity. But it's all been in Texas, and I love Texas. Like, it's just, I just find it so fascinating. Virtually everything in Texas I find fascinating. Like, I just, it's a real experience. I just feel so welcome there, and the people are just, the people are always so cool, and I really love everything about Texas. But that's all I've seen. I haven't, apart from flying through airports, I haven't hunted anywhere else. So I need to change that. I haven't been to Alaska either. I haven't been to Alaska yet. So that is on the cards for the near future. But that's kind of it.
Now, Texas is so cool because, and again, I want to hunt Australia. I'm not taking anything away from that, but Texas is so cool because if you want to hunt those exotics, it gives you the opportunity to hunt those exotics. Now, because I see no difference because like it's exactly like you just said, those red stag that everybody wants to go and kill in New Zealand, they're all pen raised animals, just like the ones in Texas.
Yeah.
So there's no difference in saving yourself $4,000 and going to Texas to kill one as opposed to flying to New Zealand. Now, I want to kill an axis deer so bad. Like I would love to kill an axis deer. And it's been on the top of my list. So has blackbuck. It's been on top of my list for a long time. Would I love to do those free range, in Australia? Yes. But I can also do those free range for a whole lot cheaper in Texas. So don't just write off Texas. Like, don't just say, well, I want to go and hunt these animals in New Zealand or these animals in Australia and wherever else in Asia. I get why you want to do that. But you can also save yourself a whole lot of time and money doing it in Texas, and virtually it's the same thing. It's a trophy on the wall. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And like, there's lots of, I'm not into closed range hunting. Like, I'm not into hunting stuff behind wire. It just doesn't interest me. But it has its place. And, like for me, with those kinds of species, it has to be free range or nothing. So like, I shot a nice whitetail buck in Texas. I've shot a couple of ordads, Barbary sheep at my mate's ranch. So that was the mate that I met in Canada. When we were in Canada hunting elk and moose, him and his father were doing a father and son trip, and they said, "Oh yeah, we live in the Texas Hill Country, and we have ordads on our ranch. You can come and hunt them anytime." And I was like, "Are you serious? You're inviting me to come and hunt ordads at your ranch in Texas?" And they were like, "Yeah, of course." So what did I do? I went, and that was just amazing. Like, and they're just such beautiful people, and we're so welcoming.
And those are as free.
One day.
those are as free range gets. Like
Yeah,
people
they were wild.
override.
Wild.
Yeah. People overlook all dad in Texas because they immediately think high fence, you walk out and shoot one. Dude, I have talked to people who have hunted stone sheep and doll sheep and all dad. And they're like, I tell you what, dude, you go to Texas in the hill country and you will get your tail kicked chasing all dad.
They're switched on. Yeah, they're switched on. Just like all of their relatives that are in that similar sort of genus. Yeah, they're very, very switched on. But no, I really need to start expanding my horizons a bit. I'm actually coming over this year, and the guy I'm going with it's so strange. He just tried to call me just then. My phone just lit up. There's an old guy in Australia. Well, I shouldn't say old. He's 80. Ian's 83, I think, this year. So he's not that old. But this guy is like the absolute, like he's like the Fred Bear of Australian bow hunting, but he's still alive. He's had such an active involvement in bow hunting since the very beginning in Australia. Has held all kinds of positions in different organisations, and he's probably single-handedly been the one who's done a fantastic job of capturing our history and really celebrating our history. He had a museum, an archery and bow hunting museum for several years that it didn't actually continue. It was a little bit hard to continue to manage, but Ian's always had a great connection with the Archery Hall of Fame in the States. So he's been over to the American Archery Hall of Fame event several times previously. And he asked me this year if I would go with him because this will be his last trip. He's getting sort of to that age where he won't be able to fly internationally. So yeah, so I'm coming over in May for that. So that'll be really interesting. But there won't be any hunting happening. It'll just be socializing. It's a shame there's not really anything to hunt at that time of the year. There's really not much going on in May, is there? For you guys, there's not really too much to get excited about.
Spring bear hunting.
Yeah, okay.
There's very few states that offer spring bear. Montana, I'll be hunting spring bear in Montana this year. Idaho offers spring bear. So you can hunt a few things. Hogs, turkeys. So yeah, I mean, there's a couple options, but spring bear is definitely what I get excited about. I could care less about turkeys. It's a bird. Some people just freak out over turkeys, and I'm like, but it's still just a bird. Like, no matter what, it's a bird. So I get fired up about spring bear. But yeah, man, I got to make it over to Australia. So you come here and we'll hunt some whitetails or whatever you want to hunt, and then I want to come kill an axis buck in Australia. So
yeah, well, that's easy to organize. Yeah, that's super easy. It's not an easy hunt. It's an incredibly tough hunt, especially spot and stalk. They're incredibly difficult to get near. There is potential to use tree stands in that area, and we have, with varying degrees of success in the past, it is possible to use a tree stand. But yeah, man, like, I would love to one day, I'd love to just do a really typical Midwest kind of whitetail hunt at some point in my life, like just proper. Like the really, really, really typical kind of whitetail hunt. In Texas, it's kind of a bit different. You're hunting out of blinds and they're using corn and stuff like that. So it was interesting, but I really would like to do a really traditional, classical whitetail hunt one day. Yeah, that really interests me. We'll
have to make it happen, man. For sure.
Easy.
Well, guys, thank you so much for listening. Ben, where can they find you at, man? Because if you don't follow Ben Selleras, you are doing yourself a disjustice, because the dude's hunted in 16 countries, receiving awards for the biggest sheep killed. I mean, just he's an incredible hunter. You need to be following him. Where can they find you at, Ben?
Yeah, I'm not terribly active on social media, but I still updated and there's fairly regular stuff happening. Like I've got a fairly busy schedule each year. There's always hunts happening, and my Instagram handle is just at Ben Selleras, and that's BenSalleras. And my business page is Silent Pursuits, at Silent Pursuits. So that's my booking agency. So yeah, if anyone's interested in coming to Australia, or if you need it, even if someone just wanted some info about the options that are here, please hit me up. The website silentpursuits.com. You can contact us through there or through social media. But yeah, even if you just want a bit of info about what options are available over here, I'll be more than happy to help. But yeah, mate, it's been great to catch up, and yeah, it sounds like the seed's been planted for maybe another exchange hunt here, a whitetail, whitetail hunt in the States, and then an axis hunt over here. There's a lot of pigs in that area too. So when we're hunting axis, there's always pigs. There's a pig around every corner. So it's kind of
and I like
there's
killing
dingoes
pigs
and stuff like that. Yeah, well, it's cool. It's a really interesting place, and it's very, very Australian. There's thousands of kangaroos everywhere, and wallabies and snakes and goannas, and it's very it's an authentic Australian experience hunting in that area. So you'd have a ball. And you're not far from the Great Barrier Reef, so we'll be able to go out to the Great Barrier Reef and do the fishing and diving and stuff as well.
Nice. I'm in. Count me in. I'm on my way there. I'll see you tomorrow.
Let's make it happen, mate. Let's make it happen.
Guys, there's not many things that I'm going to tell you to stop and do right now. One of those things is to stop and go join Pope & Young right now. It's $45 for the entire year to be a member of Pope & Young. And what that does for you is that helps to ensure your rights as a bow hunter. Pope & Young is constantly fighting for your rights as a bow hunter. They are the national bow hunting organization in North America. They exist to protect your rights as a bow hunter. They are all the time going before state legislators to fight for your rights and to continue protecting your rights as a bow hunter. The record book exists in the first place because somewhere between us and the Indians, people had lost sight that bow hunting was a lethal way of harvesting big game. And so Glenn St. Charles and his group of cohorts, they started the record book so they could take it to different states and show that bow hunting is, in fact, a ethical way of harvesting big game. So guys, don't get caught in Pope & Young only being a record book. They are your voice for bow hunters, and there's power in numbers. So I would highly encourage you to join today because we need to stand together to protect our rights. Also, what you might not know is if you've bought a Bear bow, you can go and register that bow, and you're actually going to get a free Pope & Young membership. Bear Archery is such a believer in the mission of Pope & Young and what they stand for and what they do to protect our rights that they are going to buy your first year's membership. So if you've bought a bow, go online and register that bow, and you're going to get a free year's membership to Pope & Young. But guys, I would encourage you, stop right here, right now, and go join Pope & Young because we have to protect our rights as bow hunters.
Guys, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it. Stay tuned to see me hunting down under.